Om Hiranmaye Parikoshe Virajan Brahmaniskalam Tachu Brahm Jyotisham Jyoti Tadyadatma Vidho Vidhu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shining like burnished gold, highest and deepest, the core intelligence of living beings, partless and indivisible, pure, free of all taint, the essence in everything which all beings seek, either knowingly or unknowingly. There shines Brahman. It is that which the Guru teaches. It is that which the wise ones exult in. Om peace, peace, peace. Om mano na buddhi na shariram indriyam tanmatram bhutani na bhuta panchakam aham kritas chapi virat swarupakam tam atmanam upuiti shashvatam. Om shanti shanti shanti. That one attains to the Supreme Being who dissolves everything, the elements, the senses, the tanmatras, the mind, the ego, the intellect, into Brahman, the Supreme Reality. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. You have arrived at this place, whether live or live streaming, in a place of Vedantic worship and knowledge that we visit at least once a week as a Sangha. That is a group of like-minded individuals who are seeking higher knowledge, leading to truth, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. As we were just talking about before the class started, there's two things to be aware of. The presence of evil in birth and death, and the end of knowledge in truth. So when we speak about the latter, we speak about the process of learning and growth, leaving the limitations of secular studies and intellectualism, and moving on towards dharmic teachings, which are teachings of mind, intelligence, on inward. The kingdoms of heaven within, as they are often referred to, are these lokas, or inner worlds. And moving on up to the Paravid, the supreme knowledge, the knowledge of the self, and all the stages which that passes through. We had a chart on that last week here in this very location, as we looked at the difference between Paravidya and Aparavidya, lower and higher knowledge. And then Avidya too was a aspect of that teaching, lack of knowledge completely, that is, the mind living in a completely darkened or ignorant state, mainly means ignorant of its true nature as being birthless and deathless and timeless, like Brahman, like thy Father in heaven, as we were just chanting, as I was just chanting to begin the class. But also devoid of the strata that is there within us, between the physical universe and absolute reality. That is a whole strata of knowledge, which actually comprises a kind of direct experience of the aspects of Brahman, which are called samadhis. And that's what this chart, which I'm placing up for us to look at soon, is about. It has these lists of the various kinds of samadhis that are found in the different scriptures of India. Probably more than you can shake a stick at, as they say. But I had a somewhat copious list of it here, up the right-hand column. And we'll look at those in terms of the topic of today's class. This is, well, we've probably lost track, but it's at least the 7th or 8th class of Dissolving the Mindstream series, which will eventually be on the YouTube, and you'll be able to look back and see that. As many of our other 30 or 40 classes have now made it to YouTube on different subjects of Vedantic, Tantric, Buddhistic, and Samkhya and Yoga topics, classes that we're giving to educate particularly the Western mind, but to also bring back this yoga, this idea of union, worldwide, because to a certain extent it's been lost even in India to the peoples of today, which is why India ended up in such straitened circumstances, why Vivekananda was so concerned for his mother India when he was in the body in the late 1800s. And he wept for that kind of suffering the same way Buddha wept for the suffering of the masses 2,500 years before that, about 550 years before Christ. So these great compassionate beings come and they want to remind us of the Dharmic teachings that lead from lower knowledge to higher knowledge, and from higher knowledge to truth. And so it's a kind of samadhi then, as we're going to be talking about. The title of today's class, Dissolving the Mindstream in Kundalini Yoga. So it's a particular yoga which is rather the most mystical side of India, is probably what you would call Kundalini Yoga, with its system of 7 chakras, that is from base of the spine all the way to the crown of the head, all representing these lokas, or these worlds within you. Chakras are like spiritual vortexes. They will not be seen outwardly, of course, but everything outward is a manifestation of what they are inwardly. So this is why those cryptic statements of my Father's mansion has many chambers, or the kings of heaven are within you, or Father of Yoga says all knowledge lies within you, those kinds of things seem rather cryptic to us, but they're actually based on the experience of enlightened souls who spent long periods of time in meditation. And meditation that was focused on formlessness, which is rather alien to today's people. We're thinking in terms of everything as having form. If it doesn't have form, it doesn't exist. And in fact, even our thought forms are considered to be imaginations by most of us. Our dreams aren't real. They're just phantoms of our imagination. But we know that there are a series of dreams that happen to us in the atmosphere of higher knowledge after we've been taking teachings and after we've taken a teacher, that our dreams begin to transform because our minds are beginning to shift from a focus on lower knowledge or secular knowledge, or even worse, ignorance, beginning to shift inward ascension style to higher knowledge. And so the Dharma, as we call it, or the Jnanam, the Atma-Gyan teachings of the indivisible self within, as opposed to the individual self. The indivisible self that begins to leave its impression on our minds the way lower knowledge used to. And we begin to climb up and out of our satisfaction, temporary satisfaction with lower knowledge. It only satisfies for a little while, Swami Vivekananda says. But higher knowledge will satisfy for all times, because if taken to the pinnacle of what it's suggesting, what it's pointing towards, these samadhis will begin to happen. After that, ignorance has had its day. You see, you don't even have to fight it anymore. You'll realize that it's unreal. So, pramedana na sandeha kim karashyami vrittiman udpadyante vilyante buddhascha yata jale. Water, jale. So it means ignorance is unreal. So how can it cause any real doubt? All your doubts that you're having are based on some premonition or some anterior thought that came out of ignorance. So what your experience is the effect of the cause of ignorance. They're both unreal. So therefore, dissolve them back in like bubbles in water. Buddhascha yata jale. Dissolve them all back into like bubbles into water. These mental projections that come up based on ignorance. So what we want to do is begin to have projections that come up based on knowledge, and then transfer those or transform those into projections that come up based in higher wisdom. And then make sure that this wisdom is aimed towards truth. There's a beautiful sloka in the Upanishads that says, Dhanur grihitvam Upanishadam Mahastram. Mahastram, great Upanishad scriptures, the great scriptures. Dhanur grihitvam Upanishadam Mahastram Sharam Hupasanashita Sanjayita Ayamya Tad Bhavakatena Chetasa. Chetasa, intelligence. See? Laksham Tarivaksharam Somya Vidhi. Take the Upanishads like they were a bow and fasten to that bow the arrow of mind after it's been sharpened by thoughts of reality alone. Then point it toward the mark, release, and penetrate it. You're penetrating the imperishable Brahman. See? So you have to take your mind, sharpen it by thoughts on reality alone, and then point it at the mark and release and penetrate it. That's what's meant by moving from asato ma sadgamoya tamaso ma jyotir gamoya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. You move from lower to higher, from lesser to greater, from ignorance to wisdom, from the illusion of death to eternal life. You move in that fashion, and it has its end in truth, absolute. So my point here being that when you're dissolving the mind that way, which is what we'll be talking about today in Kundalini Yoga style, you're going to become aware of the disappearance of ignorance by degrees, although you might not see it pass. There's a song in India that says, "One day I awoke and my ignorance was gone, utterly gone." Who can contain the truth, the song goes on. Who can keep a burning fire tied in a cotton cloth? You cannot contain the truth. Once it gets loose, it burns everything. Vivekananda said that too. It's like camphor, it burns and leaves no residue. There's a beautiful sloka in the Viveka Chudamani by Shankara that says that. Grass, husk, paddy, wood, when burned, all becomes one thing, ashes. When you burn everything in the mind, it all becomes one thing, reality. When you burn these impediments in the mind, just like you would burn the elements in fire, when you burn everything in the fire of yoga, it becomes one thing, samadhi, becomes divine reality. That's all you focus on. So my point I'm making is that ignorance goes away naturally because it never existed. How can it cause any real doubt then? See? Once you realize that it's something that you allowed to occupy your mind, and you take the steps to get rid of it, then you will never have to worry about practice again. It's not a matter of ending up being a professional student in Vedanta. That's not what we're after. We do our sadhana for a definitive end. That's for the end of ignorance. Once ignorance is gone, you can go anywhere, do anything you want. You can move to any realm you want, from form to formlessness and back again, without any impositions, without any impediments, without any antaryayas or vikshepas or kleshas or passions or fetters, which is what we talked about over the last two classes. The last two classes here were called Dissolving Ignorance, Dissolving the obstacles in the mind stream. So the obstacles to dissolution of the mind stream have been listed already, and we've looked at them. So this week we're going on to look at Kundalini Yoga. So I call your attention back again for the 7th or 8th time to the original chart, which is also the main chart in the book that's about to be released, called Dissolving the Mind Stream by SRV Associations. And you see that we've gone through it enough, so unless you've just joined this live stream, you've seen this chart many times, and you know that it's a matter of fives, dissolving 5 back into another 5 into another 5. Panch is the word for 5 in Sanskrit. So you're doing panchakarna. You're realizing that the 5s are karnas, causes. And each one of them becomes the effect of another cause as it moves outwardly. And in that way the universe is projected, not created. No origin to it. This is a cycle that's happening all the time. All you need to do then is count the fingers on your hand, the toes on your feet, and the 5 elements around you, and begin to realize that you're giving yourself a hint that everything happened by 5s. And if you get a hold of the 5s, then you can connect earth to smell, and water to taste, and fire to sight, and air to touch, and hearing to ether. Once you connect hearing to ether, you've stepped inward. Ether is space. Guess how many kinds of space there are?
5.
5, right. They're called the 5 akashas in Sanskrit. So you begin to move back into the kingdoms of heaven within you. That is, your dream state even becomes pronounced. Your dream states are figments of your imagination. Why? Because ignorance is still attending your dream state. Doesn't this life become more beautiful, more clear, more full of divine love and compassion and service and everything when your mind is cleared of ignorance in the waking state? Well, won't that be the case also in the dreaming state? If your mind shifts to dream tonight and it moves away from the 5 outer elements and the 5 senses, it'll take up the 5 inner senses and the 5 inner elements, but it won't be attended by ignorance. It'll be attended by the knowledge of panchakarna, how everything proceeds by 5s inward. And it's not like you have to take account of the 5s. You can do this just by natural inward ascension. See, whatever comes up, you'll dissolve it back into the ultimate reality. It doesn't matter, you don't have to count it. But this particular process allows you to know how panchakarna works and how ancient it is. And there are scriptures named after it, teachings by great rishis named after it, and beings who have accounted for it so that you can account for it if you want to do a definitive retracing of the causes and effects that came out of your mind, your 5-fold mind. See, if you count the Mahat, the great mind, there are it's a 5-fold mind there: thoughts, ego, intelligence, and the dual mind itself. Add Mahat. How many? Can you say 5? So the way you trace yourself back in then is all by this series. And we've looked at that in terms of these kinds of sets until finally you approach the Word and you find out that if there is any real cause, it's going to be in the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. That's 3 things that Christ said about the Word. So you just have to understand those 3 things. What it means when the Word is separate from God, God's mind. What it means when the Word is with God, that is the cosmic mind beginning to merge into the ultimate mind, the original mind, and then where there is no mind at all, where all thought stops, all intelligence stops vibrating, no vrittis or vibrations anymore, and then you're at the top of the the samadhi chain. You've reached nirvikalpa, or what Buddha called nirvana. Now the way that that happens in Kundalini Yoga, you can see here by this chart, and we might as well look at it at the outset so we get some ground covered today in our 3-hour class. We'll take a break about an hour and a half in. But we'll be able to look at one of the great systems of India that has been very much befriended by Vedanta. Kundalini Yoga has a lot of tantric element in it, a lot of Shiva Shakti in it. You're talking about Shakti being at the base of the spine and reaching for her Lord, reaching for union with her Lord, Shiva, who abides as Paramashiva at the crown of the head. Of course, these are all rather cryptic and symbolic references of these 7 centers that exist within you. But such great beings as Sri Ramakrishna have told us that there will be no spiritual awakening until Kundalini starts to rise. So you can see how much import he attaches to the Kundalini Yoga system. And there's an Upanishad actually named Yoga Kundalini Upanishad. And the Taittiriya Upanishad, a lot about Kundalini in that Upanishad, as we'll be studying soon at one of our ashrams. But speaking of Sri Ramakrishna, I put some of his quotes here so we can trace the 7 chakras, because this is a way that must probably say this out front, the mind will begin to dissolve naturally as it ascends the centers, as it reaches different vortexes. The 3 lower centers, Sri Ramakrishna called associated with eating, drinking, and sex life. So these are lower worlds. There are 7 worlds, here they are, that go with the 7 chakras. Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha are the lower centers. Then Mahar, that's the 4th, Vyahriti it's called. Then Janaloka, Taparloka, and Brahmaloka. By the time the Taittiriya Upanishad was collected, this had been seen by one great rishi. And he had proclaimed it, and so people were beginning to think about a 4th world inside of oneself. And they were beginning to assign names to it and have seers meditate on it to open up what was in it. So these first 3 were called, these are called the 4 Vyahritis in Taittiriya Upanishad. What it really means is 4 great declarations. If you say Bhur, Bhuvaha, Swaha, then you're proclaiming the 3 mystical utterances that are the words for these 3 worlds, outer, inner, and transcendent. You could also put them in a system of earth, lower heaven, and higher heaven, or earth, interspace, sometimes they call it, and higher, and heaven. Interspace is a place where these beings that don't have form, but who are not in heaven yet, abide. They're just beyond the reach of our senses. And you could call them guardians at the gate between earth and heaven. Or in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, you would find more reference to them. But basically those 3 worlds, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, will go with these 3 lower centers, the 3 chakras, which you see here listed as well. So in that way, we will let's take some quotes by Sri Ramakrishna on each one of them. Starting with these 3 lower ones, there's one quote that is put together out of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He says, "Yoga is not possible if the mind dwells on the 3 lower planes of existence only. The Manipura, Svadhisthana, and Muladhara." So that's 3, 2, and 1 in order. Manipura is at the navel, Svadhisthana is at the organs of generation, and Muladhara is at the base of the spine. He goes on, "A worldly man's mind moves among these 3 centers at the navel, the sexual organ, and the organ of evacuation. These 3 represent eating, drinking, and sex life. But when Kundalini Shakti is awakened, it passes through these 3 lower centers and pierces the heart chakra. Then a man hears the subtle sound and sees light, and he cries out in mute wonder, oh, what is this? What is this? So subtle sound means not necessarily you'll hear the Om, but you'll hear the sound of bells, you'll hear the sound of lightning, thunder, and you'll hear other divine sounds that are accented as you break through these veils of ignorance. Just like popping a balloon, you'd hear a sound, right? So you've got this sort of elastic covering of different kinds of ignorance that are veiling each of these centers from each other, and as you pierce through them, you hear sounds going off. So these are mentioned in the Upanishads too. And he says you will see light. So that means you'll see fireflies in your consciousness, your eyes closed. You'll maybe see a great disk around obelisk, like, or you might see haze and smoke going away, clearing, clouds clearing in the sky. People have these experiences when they pierce through these three lower centers. So sound and light, Shabda and Jyoti, very, very important to Upanishads and to Kundalini Yoga system. You should probably watch out for them and even begin to anticipate them, anticipate the arrival of those on the scene. If you've heard about them early on, then you won't be taken by surprise by them. If you've heard the seers talk about them and you've read about them in the scriptures. Now, so all in one sloka, he talks about pretty much a definitive definition for the three lower chakras. The fourth chakra is at the heart center, which he mentions, where you'll hear these subtle sounds and see this light. He says about it, the center at the heart corresponds to the fourth plane of the Vedas. In this center, it is a lotus called Anahata, and it has 12 petals. So that's also a correlative with this fourth world, or fourth Vyahriti, called Maharloka. Mahar means great. It's the great world. That transcends these three lower chakras. Arriving there, at the heart, a man is satisfied. All desires get satisfied. He sees the form of the Lord, and he begins to have communion in the heart chakra with God, with form. It's the realm of bhakti and devotion, and so forth. And so many divine moods are there. I mean, we could start taking some of these up, correlative over here. You see them. Savitarka, Nirvitarka, Savichara, Nirvichara, Unmana, Sananda, Bhava Samadhi. Those are pretty much corresponding to the piercing of the third world into the fourth world, that is, or the third chakra into the fourth chakra. Especially Bhava Samadhi, because the Bhava Samadhis are samadhis of devotion, intense love and devotion. A man has never seen and heard sounds and sights like that on earth. There are enough splendorific things to see outside of yourself. Mountains, rivers, canyons, sceneries, sunsets, and so forth. But when it comes to the inner vision like that, then that has not been experienced by that soul yet. And so when they penetrate through to that fourth chakra, Maharloka, the Loka, the great world, then they're having these very wonderful inner visions and inner sounds. And they will then be a conduit for light and sound. We'll begin to meditate on Om and on light and so forth, and they'll begin to reflect the higher qualities of that particular level of awareness. Transcending that, then, you would go towards the fifth chakra at the throat. He says, the Vishuddha, the fifth plane, is at the throat. It has 16 petals. When Kundalini reaches it, one wants to talk and hear only about God. Talk of worldly subjects cause him pain. Well, he's speaking from his own experience there, because when he did his practice of tantric practices and so forth, and felt and had his devotion to Mother Kali, then she started rising in him and showing him these secrets. And then he found that he couldn't listen to worldly talk anymore. The people around the temple and people who would come and so forth. And he was not yet invested with his direct disciples yet. They hadn't started to come, the young men and some of the other disciples. So he was fairly much on his own and going through his 12-year sadhana period, and so he had these inner experiences of beautiful sounds and sights and so forth, and that's why people would call him mad, or call any being mad who began to exhibit signs of Kundalini awakening. Beyond the ken of their understanding, of course, so they wouldn't know how to say it any other way. He's different, you see. There's something different happening to him, or he's just gone mad, whatever the case may be. So he himself said that at that time it became painful for him to listen to ordinary talk, the lower grade mantras that were being bantered around from person to person. How's the weather, and how are you doing, and so forth. Those things became painful to him, so that he would withdraw into silence, love of lonely study, as Krishna calls it, and he would study himself. He would study the rising of Kundalini, just he and Mother, just God and the devotee together, beginning to head toward knowledge of oneness of God and devotee. The two become one, you see. But in the meantime, the two are separate, and they're fivefold. See? So now they come together, and they come together in oneness, and everything is joined. That's called union or yoga. And this is the Kundalini yoga way of saying it. We know there's Jnana yoga, Bhakti yoga, Dhyan yoga or Raja yoga, the meditation yoga, and Karma yoga, those yogas of action, meditation, devotion, and wisdom. But now the Kundalini yoga is talking about this yoga of Shakti and Shiva coming together, the two eternal principles beginning to come together into one, a divine relationship. So it will pass through these centers of devotion, peace, and bliss, and silence, and transcendence, see, in a sort of upper trajectory, like a trikona. See. I have a chart I'll show you about the death of ignorance in Kundalini next, but let's finish a little review of these chakras. Going beyond that throat chakra, Vishuddha means the purest. Shuddha is pure, V means just exceedingly pure. Purer than the purest is Vishuddha. So a very pure mind. It only wants to hear about God, talk about God, and that's all that thrills it. See, everything else has become get thee behind me kind of material. So to go beyond that then would be, as Sri Ramakrishna said, I think he even has it, put it here, he's running a boat race between this center, and this center. His mind is going up and down these three centers and coming down occasionally to the heart chakra where he can meet the devotees. He said this is the living room of God, where I can meet the devotees. But if I go any higher, then the teachings take me over, and the teachings put me into, if thine eye be single, you'll know the truth, and then that state ushers me into crown chakra, 1,000 petals of bliss, you see, of divine realization. So he says about it, the Agya center, that is, the sixth plane corresponds with Agya center. Its presence is at the eyebrows. It has a lotus of 2 petals. There one sees the form of God, but there is still a barrier. It is like a light in a lantern. You cannot touch it due to the glass. Though you're very close to union with reality when consciousness rises to this center. Just a slight veil separates you. That's classically put in Kundalini teachings as the Rudra Granthi. It's a very slight, subtle membrane that separates this center from this center. It's very difficult to penetrate through because it's so subtle. So there are many great seers that could arrive and even pass out of their bodies at this center when they die. That is, when they assume death, then they would pass out of the third eye and they could come back in. That's the passageway of the yogis. They basically come out of those centers. But the supremely illumined soul will pass in and out of the crown chakra, and we'll read about that in a second. But he says here that it's like a light in the lantern. If thine eye be single center is I found references to it in 7 different religions, not just Vedanta in India, but in China and in Christianity and in Gnostic religion and so forth. You find references to this third eye called by different things. Krishna calls it the Jnana Chakra. That is the eye of wisdom. Jnana Chakshu actually calls it. Chakshu means to see, Chakshur. So you're the seer there at that center, and you see everything as unified in its original condition. That is, all variegations and haphazard things and chaos and rough corners and elbows and knees and everything have come together, and it's like focusing in on your eye focusing in on one thing. The rooster is very scattered all around, you see. But if you grab its head, put its beak on a dot on the ground, then its eyes all of a sudden go like this and focus. And it's hypnotized there. You can actually take your hand off the rooster's head and yell at it. And it's just sitting there focused on this dot on the ground. We did that experiment as children. So that dot on the ground, as it were, for the yogi is third eye. It's called a bindu. It's a Sanskrit word for it, bindu. It has to do with Om. And you can cut the bindu in half, it's called half moon, and you can pass through it. So that's how, through certain practices that are very Kundalini Yoga oriented, you can so master your consciousness as to bring it to one focal point and use it to penetrate through that Rudra Granthi and get to the crown chakra. And Sri Ramakrishna did that, mastered that. And there's where you get these higher samadhis that we've said here. The names of some of them, Sampragyata, Salvikalpa, you go beyond those to Sthiti Samadhi, steady Samadhi, to Jada Samadhi, stunned state. You're in a stunned state from everything you've seen inside. Sri Ramakrishna said, I became like an inert thing, like a rock. I couldn't move. I would sit in meditation and it's like Mother Kali, Mother Kundalini was locking my joints. I could actually hear the sounds of her locking the joints with keys. Knees, arms, elbows, and I couldn't move. And I was in this stunned state of seeing everything within me. You see. So those samadhis become more universal samadhi. The earlier samadhis are samadhis of my own wisdom, samadhis of my own bliss, samadhis of my own peace. But then they began to become less collective and individual, and they become more universal. See, and that's where you have these experiences of universal mind. Finally, bhavamukha. See, I'm sort of taking these in correlation and going back and forth between the worlds, the chakras, and the actual samadhis that happen in them. It's the way this chart has been set up. In a roughly general sort of way, not exactly across the board, but because people's experiences are going to differ, like thumbprints, they say. So you'll have different order of experiences in these, but basically these are set up in a way to show you what happens when you access inner worlds, and you have the experiences there, and what those experiences are. We know what the experiences are at these 3 lower worlds. I mean, not many of us know what happens to us in heaven. We don't remember. That's basically the level of the realm of our ancestors, where you go to heaven and you have concourse or recourse with different people whom you've known before, and then you just play it back when you're born in the body, and you're born with certain individuals together, and you have your experiences on earth here for 80, 100 years. You pass back into heaven again. That's what we think of as heaven as earth, heaven and earth in Vedanta, very lower levels of consciousness for beings who are trapped in such a cycle. Buddha wanted out of that cycle and showed us the way. If you're not trapped in that cycle, then experiences of earth and heaven can be just as free and blissful as any, you see. Sri Ramakrishna said, here on earth I can eat, drink, and be merry, because he wasn't attached to the earth. It wasn't under the press of the 6 passions. He wasn't under the control of the 8 fetters. He wasn't dealing with the 9 antaryayas. He wasn't having a problem with the 5 kleshas. You see, I've just used sets of obstacles that we've studied over the past 2 weeks. Antarayas are in yoga. You see, the passions and the fetters are in Tantra and Vedanta. And And then the kleshas, of course, are the 5 impediments in Patanjali. So, however you want to look at it or examine it, Sri Ramakrishna is not having any problems with those, you see, because his consciousness is always, as we showed in that chart last week, like a hot air balloon, right? Remember that chart? Crafting a pure and buoyant mind, it's called. The mind's naturally buoyant, then it doesn't really have to practice, you see. It will have gone through the phase of practice already. I hope you know what I'm saying. It's not like you can be like Ramakrishna. People say, oh, I think I'm going to go sing and dance in bliss. But then the next day they're just their old self again. Ramakrishna didn't have an old self. He had a timeless, birthless, deathless, ageless self. And he lived in it all the time. So his whole existence was a dance. Leela, a dance of ecstasy. He wasn't returning to some old and going to some new, you see. So we can't just be like that. You should do your practice. But once the practice has been accomplished, you can sort of let go of the earmarkings of it. You keep it in the background memory, because if you come back into the body, you're going to want to say, oh, here's the 5 elements again. Oh, here's my 5 senses again. And then you're going to say, oh, I remember I had those in another life. I had those when I was outside the body, and I will have them when I go into meditation this morning. I will go without the senses. I'll even transcend the mind. Or I will craft a pure, buoyant mind, which is always lifting. Lifting means going inward, higher levels, without any impediments. I've thrown the sandbags out. See, we studied that last week in that chart. So across the board, I'm going, generally speaking here, if you were to reach this third eye plane, then you might be having, like Ramakrishna, bhava mukha. He said, Mother Kali kept me in bhava mukha for a while. And he described it so we could understand it. And in these paddy fields or cane fields, they have these bulks, you see, that come up like ridges, right? And you can walk across the ridges without cutting your feet on the stubble that's down there in the cane field. So there's these rises, and so you get up on the rise and you can walk right across the field without any problem. So he said that was like the state she put me in. She put me in a place where I could walk along a ridge and see the world on one side and God on the other. That's bhava mukha. Mm-hmm. And he's not falling into either one. As he fell toward the world, then he'd be coming back down towards this 4th chakra. And he might do that on occasion. He often said, a bird might fly high, but it needs to come to rest on a branch sometimes, you see. So he's talking about coming back down to the center. But he wouldn't come back down to abide in these centers. He might come back down and notice them for your sake, but he wouldn't come back down and abide in them. So mostly his mind had this inward leaning, naturally inward leaning, because Mother Kundalini was just taking him inward. She locked down his body, as I said, so his mind could get buoyant and be free of the body, and the body wouldn't be there for hours at a time. So that's dissolution of the mind stream, isn't it? You're actually dissolving the 5 elements and the 5 senses and going into dream state, and you're dissolving those, the heavenly state, right? You're dissolving those 5 elements and those 5 senses that you have in heaven, because you're not formless in heaven yet. From all accounts I've heard, even in Christendom, you're not formless in heaven. That's why your religion has to provide you with a doctrine or a principle of formlessness. If it doesn't, then it hasn't taken you very far. And in the West, we don't have a philosophy of formlessness. We don't have it. We have to borrow it from other realms, from Buddhism, from Vedanta, basically from India, or from India as it went to China and Tibet. So then that gives us a basis on which to meditate on formless essence. Otherwise you don't have it. Earth, heaven, and hell are your kind of 3 worlds, you see. And you're transmigrating. The soul is transmigrating in a kind of dream movement through these 3 realms. So you want to pierce through those, the Brahma Granthi and the Vishnu Granthi and the Rudra Granthi, as Kundalini puts it. pierce through them and abide at higher and higher levels of your own consciousness. And when you do, this is what will happen to you. So this is why I'm starting with this chart. So we know that, and why I'm also allocating it to dissolution of the mind. You're not doing it in fives here necessarily, although I probably could make a case for putting some of these samadhis together in sets of fives. I'll look at it and tell you later. But basically, you are dissolving things, tattvas, principles, matter, energy, thought. You are dissolving those things as you practice this Kundalini Yoga, or as Mother introduces you to deeper and deeper levels of your own existence. You find yourself at a higher level of consciousness. So that's about as far as you would go with that, is up to Bhavamukha. That was a very high state Ramakrishna described where Mother put him. He could see the worlds on one side, he could see formless reality, the light of Brahman on the other. So he was walking at a bulk in between. And she would let him go fully into Brahman and lose himself, nor would she let him go back to the world. So he was in a state of Bhavamukha. That's described in the Gospel of Ramakrishna for those of you who want to look it up for yourselves. Now, beyond that, to the crown chakra is sort of like the question I was asked in satsang this morning. What is Brahman? It's formless and it's indescribable, so I think I'll just stop talking about it right there and let you begin to meditate on it. But that's why these steps are so important, because you get to the Father through the Son. I mean, even Christ wanted you to have a philosophy of formlessness. He wanted you to know that everything was based not on origins. In the beginning was the Word. That wasn't what he meant. There is an ultimate reality called Almighty Father or Spirit beyond the origin of the Word. That's why the Word was with God first, and the Word was God later, you see. So if you're looking for origins, probably look no further than the Word, because Brahman can't be a source for anything. It is already everything. It's already infusing everything, like sweetness in sugarcane juice. So you have to ferret it out. So you have to do a distilling process. It's like patina and copper, or sesame oil and sesame seeds. It's unseen, see, and you're going to have to do a distilling process over time to pull that out, to extract that essence out, and have any clear look at it. And the look at it is going to be with one eye, not two. See, so these are all ways of explaining that are going to prepare you for a formless samadhi when the time comes. It can come upon you at any time. It can come upon you early in your practice, later in your practice, or it can be put off for a long time. You can practice for years, even lifetimes, and all of a sudden, boom, there she is. Kundalini Shakti has arisen, and she did it all in secret without you knowing it. Now she's pulling the curtain aside and saying hello to you, see. Aloha, as we say here in Hawaii. Maha aloha, if you want to put Hawaii and India together. So this great love that she is, and this great wisdom that she embodies, are one thing, Prema Bhakti and Brahma Gyan. And Kundalini Yoga is very well versed at explaining how that happens along this kind of trajectory. 7 centers with 7 worlds and a whole set of samadhis, or different experiences that happen to the soul, but they will have had to have transcended these 3 lower centers to have them. People who are abiding at these 3 lower levels are not believing in the higher samadhis. That's because how can they? They can't have them at the 3 lower centers. They're having the samadhi of food, they're having the samadhi of sexual intercourse, they're having the samadhi of lower learning, they're having all sorts of enjoyments and pleasures and minor blisses, but they know nothing of what consists from the heart inward. And that's why when you see an ecstatic being like Sri Ramakrishna, you realize his heart chakra opened a long time ago, and that's his ground right there. 3 below, 3 above, but he won't go any lower. He'll stay right there in the center. That's ecstasy. That's the bliss that you saw in him. That's these different medium samadhis that he's having. But when he went into higher samadhi, it's bye-bye to Sri Ramakrishna, you see. You can't call him out again. He used to use a funny example about that, about a person in higher samadhi. He said the wife of a family of brothers, you see, one of the brothers is her husband, so she serves them all. She serves her husband, but she serves all his brothers that come over too. And then their families come over, and she serves them too. See? And their friends come over, and she serves them too. She's serving all day long from sun up to sundown. At sundown, she goes for her bath. Then there's some need for service, you see. And they call down the hall. Her husband says, so-and-so has arrived. And she calls back, you serve them. I'm in my bath. Or then he tries an experiment. He says, the house is on fire. She says, you put it out. I'm in my bath. See? So once the woman of the house has gone for the bath, nothing can call her back. She's done her duty. She's completely guiltless. She has no remorse about, they can take care of themselves now. I provided everything for them. I'm in my bath. That's it. You see, I'm not coming back. So this is how he would describe these higher samadhis that happen from here on up, you might say. And this is why we should read this final quotation about it. He says, and these are quotes from Ramakrishna, from the Gospel of Ramakrishna, when the Kundalini rises to the Sahasrara, that means 1,000-petaled lotus, and the mind goes into samadhi, the aspirant loses all consciousness of the outer world. In that state, the life force lingers for 21 days and then passes out. He's talking about in ordinary yogis. Of course, ordinary beings will not experience that, but ordinary yogis, that is, these people who are adept people, if they have that highest samadhi, they won't hold their body more than 21 days. They'll drop it. Like a leaf, a blown-off leaf in a gale, to quote him. The body becomes like a blown-off leaf in a gale. 21 days is maximum. And then it passes out. But in the case of the incarnations and the Ishvara Kotis, that means beings who attend upon these great souls, who are their servants, who are their knowers, their lovers, they can descend from this exalted state. So they don't have to leave the body, they can come back. They like to live with the devotees, enjoy the love of God, and retain a trace of the ego, so that they can teach men. Their minds move between the 6th and 7th plane. They run a boat race, as it were, between these two subtle centers. So back into a semblance of form, 2 petals, then back out the other petal into in full consciousness again, and back again, and up again. You see, a boat race, he's calling it. And this is not only beautiful to hear described, but it's also indicative of gives you a taste of what samadhi might be like. Because it's your true nature. It's not something that's alien to you. As I was saying, I think in maybe satsang this morning or recently, that if we've learned anything from Sri Ramakrishna's advent on earth in the 1800s, is that our true nature is samadhi. That mankind's true nature is samadhi. It's not worldliness or ignorance or suffering or sin or matter or even energy. Those are just evolutes of the mind in Maya. But its true nature is this unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss of samadhi. And if thine eye be single, you shall know that. See, so however way you cut it, in whatever tradition, you will have. I mean, there are in Judaism, for instance, there's a teaching about the 7 castles or something. You see, 7 gateways, and in the other traditions, there are ways of putting this that beings have had at different times. Kundalini Yogi probably one of the most well-known and famous ones and powerful ones that many hundreds and thousands of peoples are following and have followed, and can very much in friend with the Upanishad. So a beautiful thing about running a boat race between these the 2 petals, into divine reality and back out again, and back in. The soul goes, as it were, in this very, very subtle, he says, very, very subtle subdivision. In fact, then we should take the quote at the very top of the chart, because it refers to that. Holding the highest note on the flute is very difficult, but one can come down and play with the other 6 notes of the instrument. So if you just want to hold the high note for a long time, it gets very shrill, it gets very difficult. He's talking about holding non-dual samadhi for a long time. A bird has to come to rest. So it's going to pick one of these lower branches to come down to. In other words, he's inferring that like climbing a mountain, you have to rest every 1,000 feet. Like our 2 volcanoes here on the Big Island are the tallest mountains in the world. They're even taller than Everest if you measure them from the ocean floor where they started. So as a one mass, they're huge. You see, 14,000 feet, even above sea level. So you're talking about resting. Even the mules have to rest every 1,000 feet after 10,000. So that's sort of a modern analogy we could use to explain how you become acclimatized to higher spiritual atmospheres as you run this boat race and try and ascend or attain to higher consciousness at these higher centers. You're going to have to do it by degrees and come down and rest in degrees. You're going to have to make several assaults. Now, I would say that that's not the case with this, lower centers to the heart. You should make one assault and succeed the first time. Because there are many people who are making many assaults and failing. And that, according to the father of yoga, creates a habit of failure in spiritual life. You begin to think, well, maybe these systems are phony. Maybe God doesn't exist. Maybe I should just be a material girl living in a material world and so forth, you see. Maybe I should just give up and just be matter. So this is basically the problem with making many assaults on the truth and finally never getting out of your rude ignorance. The hot air balloon can't get off the ground because it has moorings. You forgot to untie the moorings when you got in and threw out the sandbag. So what else is holding me down here? You see, like I have a rope around my neck, my hand's here pulling the rope here and there, and I don't know that I'm doing it. See? So I forgot to let go thy hold. See? Say Om Tat Sat and be free. See? So in that way, we explain this becoming aware of what's beyond earth and heaven and making a run for it, opening up the heart. If you have devotion and love for God, then you've probably opened up the heart already. And especially if it's not attended by any hypocrisy, any insincerity, or lack of humility. If these things are a part of you, then you're already operating at the heart chakra. Now you can make these multiple ascents on the third eye and the crown of the head. So those you're allowed some time to acclimatize. Even the mules have to. That is, even great souls going up the mountaintop are going to have to do this by degrees until they become like they pass the 21-day trial period, you see. Now they're not going to make this assault again for the 3rd, 4th, or 5th time like a bodhisattva or a jivan mukta has had 4 or 5 or 6 illumined lifetimes. They've gotten used to throwing off the body in 21 days after having samadhi. See, they've gotten used to that. They probably weren't attached to the body anyway, so it was no problem to let it blow off like a leaf in a gale. But these other souls are still attempting that, you see, still attempting to have their first inward ascension of any great spiritual depth. And when they attain that, they get used to it by degrees, and then pretty soon they're like the Ishvarakotis, or the incarnations, who can do that, really doing it every day when they sit to meditation. Just like you would do this every day when you sit to meditate. You see the connection. They know this process like the back of their hand, inside out. See? Evolution, involution. And what do they know besides that? That evolution and involution are myths. That this is all an imaginary process due to the mind. It's not actual. There is no change in Brahman. So what are all these changes? There's only Brahman. They say that to you all the time. So they're coming back to play the game with you, to awaken you up from the dream of finitude, to take you to the infinite. See? And that's their main purpose, if they have any purpose at all, for coming down to even the fourth chakra, where I can meet with the devotees, because the devotees aren't necessarily illumined souls yet. They're just souls that have a lot of love for God. And now they're asking, how do I make mine eye single? See? There are songs about that, you see, that we could sing, and that we have sung before. One very beautiful one, for instance, that we always like to introduce, because it's by that wonderful devotional song composer named Tulsidas, who has almost bridged the gap between East and West. A lot of his songs have become well known in Western circles. Itani vinati raghunandan se dukadanva hamara bitauji. Itani vinatu raghunandan se dukadanva hamara bitauji. 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 Vitani vinati raghunandan se. So this is my prayer to thee, O Raghunanda. Who's Raghunanda? Ram. The bliss of the Raghu clan. They all are so happy to have Ram born in their lineage, you see. Because their whole lineage for generations on either side were illumined because Ram made his appearance. He was the first of the great avatars. So this is my prayer to you, Raghunanda. Please destroy my mind's penchant to perceive duality. Destroy my mind's tendency to go dual. This. Only Brahman exists, nothing else is true. So, where I was coming from in my teaching, all of this is a process. Processes do not exist in Brahman. This is Advaita Vedanta. Welcome to non-duality. Welcome to the atmosphere 14,000 feet. See? Where even the mules have disappeared. See? You're probably not going back down on their back, you see, because they've given up everything, given up the body at 14,000 feet, and they're expecting you to do the same. And with the view you have at 14,000 feet, what's going to do, pull you back down again? See? This is all metaphorically speaking, of course, mountain climbing and all, but it has a very wonderful correlation with this Kundalini system at the highest levels of samadhi. So he says, very hard to play the highest note in the flute and hold it. You can come down to the lower flutes and play raga. You see, you have a beautiful relationship with the lower notes of the flutes. So in that way you learn how to play music. I think we have covered this chart. There is a quote at the bottom by Mahendranath Gupta, and I've been taking all these quotes out of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. That was written by Mahendranath Gupta. He is affectionately known amongst the Vedantists and Ramakrishna devotees as M. You might have heard of him. Just M, he liked to sign his name. Mahendranath Gupta. So he was one of the great householder disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who was older than the young boys when Naren, Vivekananda, and Rakal, Brahmananda, and others were with Ramakrishna. They were all in their teens, you see, at first. But at that time, I think M was in his late 20s, early 30s, so he was much older than them. He was a school teacher and very conservative in a way. Ramakrishna would dance and sing, and devotees would dance and sing with him, but M would sit on the sidelines, watching. Come dance. You're going to miss a mart of joy, Ramakrishna would tell him. He'd say, oh no, I won't dance. But then you read later, there's the Gospel of M in some 5, 6, 8 volumes, you see. And that's after Ramakrishna had passed and M had become very elderly. He was dancing and singing all the time. If you read those books by one of the young Swamis, you'll find out that M had turned into a rather ecstatic person by his older age. So he says, M, down here from the Gospel, with a magnifying glass one can make tiny objects look very big. Likewise, through the practice of yoga, one can detect the subtle spiritual lotuses. So M must have been one who was operating at heart, mind, center, you see. He had love for Ramakrishna and he had knowledge. And his lower knowledge, quickly after meeting Ramakrishna, started turning into mother wisdom, Kundalini Yoga. He started becoming aware that mother is a living entity, that wisdom and intelligence are living things. See, this beautiful song we just sang. Please cause my mind to awaken to intelligence and to watch Kundalini rise, become a participant in that process. See, the process of all processes. So pass through the processes and arrive at the goal. From lower truth to higher truth, from higher truth to, from lower knowledge to higher knowledge, from higher knowledge to truth, as Krishna says in the Gita. It's an ancient path. Set your foot on it, walk it. In every lifetime, you find yourself in the body. Put your foot on that path and walk it, and all will be well with you. So the beauty then of some of these teachings of Kundalini Yoga, and here you see at the very top, Satori, Turiya, Nirvana, Asampragata, Nirvikalpa. These are different sayings. Satori was, of course, in Zen. Turiya is in Advaita Vedanta. Nirvana is in Buddhism. Asampragata is in Yoga. And Nirvikalpa is in Advaita Vedanta. So you find those 5, how many? Those 5 descriptions of the highest state of awareness in accordance with these higher philosophies and their founders, their seers. That is, Buddha, Vedavyas, if you will, then father of yoga, Patanjali, and so forth. They all have these great correlations with these ancient seers. Hard to tell which one is earlier than the last, because they too have had many incarnations. But their incarnations have all been in higher consciousness. They remember them all. Like Krishna says in the Gita to Arjuna, I remember all my rebirths. So in that way, you could count, over 20 Vedavyasas have come to teach the scriptures over time. They have names for them in the tradition. They're all Vedavyas incarnation of Krishna many times over, you might say. So that is one chart that we can look at to introduce us into this dissolution of the mind stream process via consciousness and awareness of the 7 chakras and the different things, how they correlate with the different worlds within us, kingdoms of heaven within us, and what kind of experiences we have. It's a very beautiful, comprehensive chart that we look at least once a year here in SRV Loka, in the Dharma Kaya, in the body of the teachings of Vedanta, so that we remind the mind of our true nature, which is samadhi. It's not something we're reaching for as a goal, although that's allowable. It's something that always is, and we're becoming aware of it by degrees. As these curtains of ignorance show themselves up to be unreal and just disappear, thin out like fog bank and go away, leaving the seer in its own state of higher awareness, which it always was, always will be. But that's why this practice of thinning out these veils or these curtains is so important. Now I was going to show you the trikona idea. We can take that to end the first half. It's this disappearance of ignorance by these trajectories. Here's the trikona. You can see that it is a way of proceeding. The disappearance of ignorance, they call it, in this particular tradition. And let me try and call up my version of it here. So I won't have to crane my neck so much to explain it, to explain some of the beautiful teachings in it. The quote at the top is by Ram Prasad Sen, and I actually spontaneously recited it at the beginning of class. His song sings, "One day I awoke and my ignorance was gone, gone, utterly gone. Who can conceal the truth? Who can keep a blazing fire tied in a cotton cloth?" It's powerful enough when spoken, but if you hear Ram Prasad sing it to you, you'd probably go into one of these samadhis because it's so convincing. There are great seers, of course, who are songsters, like Milarepa in Tibetan Buddhism comes to mind, who was so spontaneous with his music and his lyrics that he would sing a song at you the minute he met you. And that song would either please you or displease you, depending on what condition you were in at the time he saw you as a soul in your evolution, because he would tell the truth about what he saw. So he could sing, "You're a fool, you're a fool. So wake up, you stupid idiot." Or he could say, "Oh, you've been coursing along very well in your trajectory of life, going from lower truth to higher truth and so forth. Keep it up." Or he could sing about the high qualities of a Buddha, if he met a Buddha along the way, like his teacher Marpa. So whatever the case may be, his songs, like Ram Prasad's, have this very deep power of awakening in them. Which is why I sing songs occasionally during these talks, so that we could see that many of the great knowers of Brahman and seekers of truth in India used chants, slokas, mantras, bhajans, stotrams in order to explain these very beautiful truths. For instance, and it's probably a good time to offer it to Vivekananda, because he's the contemporary seer that we have championed in the West, because he came amongst us in 1893 at the Parliament of Religions and brought us these teachings. Otherwise, would we be sitting here right now if Vivekananda hadn't have taken the trouble to jump the ocean like Hanuman did in earlier times and bring these teachings to us? Would SRV be in existence? Would Vedanta even be here in the West if he hadn't have gone against the traditional dictates of India and left the country with the teachings and taken them to other people, and lost his caste, the Brahmin priest said. But when they told him that, he wrote back to them and said, "I've not lost my caste, I don't have any caste. How can I lose it? I'm a sannyasin, I'm free. I'm not like a Brahmin priest or a warrior or a merchant. Those are castes. I'm a free soul. I can go anywhere I want, do anything I want." The sannyasin stands on the head of the Vedas. He does not necessarily have to follow the Vedas, because he stands at the head of the Vedas. So this is his retort to the Brahmin priests who criticized him about coming to England, America, and parts of Europe to bring the Vedanta to us. So I want to sing a little bit about this disappearance of ignorance and the onslaught, you might say, of this higher wisdom in the form of Vivekananda. Vimoksham svatmanas chaturyogabihi pritagva samhatayu hitam lokasya cha tavagya sadayediti priyanaraha viveka nandate prabhate pranjali narendra shashave narendra yovane narendra kridane narendra shikshane Narendra Palane, Narendra Harpane, Vivekananda Te, Prabhati Pranjalihi, Yatin Yuristava, Pranamam Dashyati, Prafulam Satpadaha, Prasunam Pravritim, Davartam Kokilo Manogyam Kujati, Vivekanandate, Prabhati Pranjalihi, Narendra Shashave, Narendra Yovane, Narendra Kridane, Narendra Shikshane, Narendra Palane, Narendra Yarpane, Vivekanandate, Prabhati Pranjali, Vivekanandate, Prabhati Pranjali. Those are just 2 verses of a stotram that was written to Vivekananda, about Vivekananda, in recent times. The Swami who wrote this is still alive, I believe, and in the body. So you can see how many stotrams and beautiful bhajans and creations of music, poems and so forth have been written to these great souls by hundreds and thousands of beings. Some 5 million beings on earth now are aware of Sri Ramakrishna and his great disciple, Swami Vivekananda. And becoming aware of the divine consort, Mother Sharda, who was the subtle backdrop to the whole thing. Divine Mother Kundalini, who is behind Ramakrishna and behind Vivekananda. They used to say about her that they couldn't even lift their finger if it wasn't for her. She was their power. And Vivekananda used to say, Mother Kundalini, she's my especial thing. You don't understand. Until Mother gets awakened in us, there will be no spiritual growth for any of us. So this is all references to this Kundalini system and how powerful it is and how it can dissolve the mind, what to speak of in terms of 5s, how it can dissolve the mind outright in a thrice, if she so wishes, those who have faith in her and give themselves 100% to her. Great, great souls that are popular or unknown have said so. I mean, we know how Mahatma Gandhi felt about Ramakrishna, and we know how Aurobindo felt about Divine Mother. And, so souls outside our lineage are not just inside of our 5 million folds strong right now, but other beings are all speaking about this powerful Mother Wisdom that is nicely titled Kundalini. Kundalini, this, she who resides at the foundation of everything, hidden like oil in sesame seeds or patina in copper, and is just ready to make her appearance if you so beckon her out of hiding. Another beautiful song I think of when I hear this is how Mother will not accept cheap bribes. That's the name of the song. Mother will not accept cheap bribes. Cheap bribes are like sacrificing goats or buffalo or doing certain worship and offering certain articles and so forth. She only wants your pure love. If you have pure love for her, she'll come running to your aid, to your benefit. So this is part and parcel of what we have in a great Vivekananda. Some of these slokas I just sang are about the dawn of enlightenment and the death of ignorance. These 2 I just sang. Your message, transmitted from the platform of non-duality, is for the realization of the soul and the good of the world. Atmano moksharta jatad titaya cha. For the realization of self and the good of the world, in that order. You can't place the good of the world first and work for it when you're not enlightened. You're going to make a worse mess of the thing. You get realization of self first, then you work for the good of humanity. Even the airlines know that nowadays. Put your own mask on first before helping others. What good are you going to do when you don't have any oxygen? You're just going to be the death of the people around you. So that's the motto of the Ramakrishna order. Atmano moksharta. Moksharta means liberation. Atman means the self. Liberate the self, or realize that it always is liberated. And then jagad, world, hitaya, cha. And then work for the good of the world. That's the motto of Ramakrishna order, originated with Swami Vivekananda. See? So, transmitted from the platform of non-duality for the realization of the soul and the good of the world. That's the lyrics of some of these verses. Some 11 or 12 verses. Vivekananda Pranjalihi. So songs like that are very effective in communicating these truths, whereas maybe just words, they can be effective if you're tuned in, but you need some attracting element in it, to a second dimension to it. We need both sound and light, right? As we were just saying earlier in this half, that when you come to this fourth chakra, you hear divine sounds inside of you, and you see light inside of you. So sound and light have to be put together. That's why we put visuals together with transmission of the teachings, you see. The Dharma has to be accompanied by, for us in this age, visuals and audibles. So in the remaining time, which is about 5 minutes, we won't get in, that is for the first half, we won't get into this very deeply, but I can explain to you the outlay of it, so that when we come back to the second half, we might look at some of the details more deeply. It's accompanied by many quotes that I culled by different luminaries of India and other religions too. But you can see there the basic outline is, here's the ground of ignorance, called avidya. We know vidya is knowledge, and it's the same root word as the word Veda. Veda, vid, means anytime you study the Vedas, you're concentrating on the knowledge of the self, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of Atman, knowledge of Ishvara, all of those, knowledge of the teachings, all of those, the focal point. And so avidya would mean the opposite. I mean no knowledge of the Vedas, no taking recourse to the scriptures, no reliance on God or Mother, no teachings of the Dharma. That's a pretty straitened circumstance. That's a pretty unfortunate person who doesn't have those when they're available to you. You see, they're available to you. You just go seeking and you will find them. So avidya is at the root of this trikona. Trikona is like this triangle. A triangle is the only form that connects everything together. You need 3 lines. So basically, this line is the way of fulfillment via this wisdom path, and this would be more like the path of the renunciate, you see. And what happens along the way of these 2 different trajectories, discipline and fulfillment, you might say. Now, if we proceed up this side, you can see the person who is seeking fulfillment often starts at excitement. They like to get excitement out of life. They're looking for certain experiences which have to do with pleasure, increasing one's pleasure, which again will have to do with increasing one's wealth and one's foundation for enjoyment. You have to have all of these things, all your ducks in a row, in order to have more and more excitement. So you would have to transcend that and reach sukha. Sukha dukkha, I could sing you a song that has teachings on that in there, but sukha is happiness and dukkha is suffering. So sukha dukkha is a duality that is very difficult to transcend. In fact, this quote by Sri Sharada Devi says, "The happiness of the world is transitory. The less you become attached to it and the world, the more you will enjoy peace of mind." So she gives you a little cold water in your face of excitement and happiness and tells you to go beyond those things. If you go beyond, then mudita might be waiting for you. We could sing another song about that, right? You all know that beautiful song. Mudita manase kaho Rama Rama Ram, Shri Rama Rama Ram, Shri Rama Rama Ram. Prema means divine love. So mudita is a kind of joy that you get out of, well, contemplating things that are beyond excitement and beyond happiness. You get to mudita. The quote here by Sri Ramakrishna is, "The happiness of the worldly man slowly declines as his spiritual joy becomes deeper." So you have no need really to renounce happiness. You just need to pursue spirituality, and then happiness will find its replacement, you see. And the things of the world will no longer please you or detain you, or you won't attach to them. They won't impede you anymore. They'll naturally fall away, and you'll have this fourth chakra kind of sound and light, you see, where a man says, "Oh, what is this? What is this?" and forgets about everything that plagued him. Deep sleep is a way of explaining that. You forget about everything that impedes you. See, you don't have any mind. You don't have any thoughts. You're in deep sleep. You're in bliss. So that's another way of saying, if you transcend happiness and sorrow, where all your concerns are. Happiness is a problem because you want to pursue it and you want to keep it constant. But it's not possible to do that. Sorrow will always come in its turn. Sukha, dukkha. So they've realized that, and they then say, then go beyond, seek joy. And then maybe beyond joy, you could seek something like wisdom. Because there is an insurmountable, unsurpassable level of joy that happens when you get the Dharma, the teachings of the Dharma. In fact, the quote there by Holy Mother, "Perhaps one practices japa and austerity in this life. In the next life, one intensifies that spiritual mood, and in the following life advances it further, and this spiritual evolution goes on." So she's looking at it in a several lifetime scenario. Doesn't it sound familiar? Most Buddhist schools talk to you in terms of 3 lifetimes. If you find yourself in the body right now without the knowledge of Brahman, then you're looking at a 3 lifetime scenario. You've created karma that brought you here. You have to recognize that karma and do a practice to get rid of that ignorance. Then you have to have a 3rd lifetime where you're free. On that 3rd lifetime that you live in freedom, you become a bodhisattva. That is a free soul. Now, how many more lifetimes am I going to live? Dalai Lama, 14 now or something? 13 or 14? Karmapa had 10 or 12. See, so there are certain souls in Tibetan Buddhism that have reached the pinnacle of the destruction of ignorance, have awakened to their spiritual life, become free, but it was all predicated on that one lifetime where they got free. And they say prior to that, there was a lifetime where they had to practice, and prior to that, a lifetime where they realized they had to practice. They were in ignorance of the true nature. Ignorance can be blissful, you see, but that kind of bliss is lowercase b. Higher case b, we have a word for that in Vedanta. Ananda. Yeah. There are hundreds and thousands of souls with the last name of Ananda now, occupying this world, you see. You wouldn't want to be a deliverer of a telegram that says Mr. Ananda on it. It'd be very hard to find. They'd all want to be Mr. Ananda, so that unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss is Ananda. But this bliss of ignorance, you see, that's going to be accompanied all the time with these rounds of birth and death, suffering and happiness. One needs to transcend that and go on. In the 1 or 2 minutes remaining, we might work our way up this trajectory. After wisdom, you would get tripti. From jnana to tripti is contentment. The quote there by Swami Vivekananda, "We believe that every being is divine, is God. Every soul is a sun covered over with clouds of ignorance. The difference between soul and soul is only due to the difference in the density of these layers of clouds." So when the density of that cloud, as I was talking about earlier, thins, that fog bank of Maya thins, you begin to see your true nature, and then you begin to see that true nature in everything else. Realization of the self first, then for the good of the world, right? Until you see it in yourself, you're not likely to see it other places. even in your teacher, even in Jesus or Buddha or Krishna. You're going to have to be a jeweler to know the value of a diamond. That's how Sri Ramakrishna put it. You must be a jeweler. There's a story, and we can end here. The first half is that people used to go to a riverbank. Holy Mother liked this story very much. Go to the riverbank and rub their heels on this rock that was lodged in the bank, in the mud. Let's take the scales off their heels. Nowadays we use certain kinds of stones to get down there and try and get our heels rubbed free of dead skin. Well, they used to do that on the riverbank of the stone. Everyone would do that, but one person who was a geologist came to the river. He was a devotee of God, and he knew topography and he knew stones and so forth. He took a look at the shape of that stone, came back later that night, dug it up, took it home, and it was a huge gem. And he got rich with it.
Whoa.
So that story impressed Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, because the idea is that there's this hidden Atman, jewel of Atman, in everyone, in every being, and in the meantime we're just sort of rubbing our heels on it. You see, making the Atman other things than what it is: pleasures, wealth, fame, those kinds of things. That's all Atman to us, you see. That's all God to us. It's become our God. But the real true God remains unassessed and unseen behind that. We have to become jewelers to realize the value of a diamond. So that's Sri Ramakrishna saying. In order to realize the value of a diamond, you must become a jeweler. So before your first realized lifetime, you're going to have to recognize the divinity in a great soul. See, then you're going to have to follow suit and say to yourself, if he is Jesus, am I? If he is Buddha, am I? If he is Krishna, am I? See, I and my Father are one. Be thee perfect as thy soul in heaven is perfect. There must be the same essence in me as is in that great being. Why haven't I realized it? And then you'll take steps to realize it, and you will come to know that rather cliché statement of the oneness of all beings. That means not a numerical oneness, but the oneness of homogeneity, oneness of inseparability. It's one from the get-go. It never was two. All processes make it look like two or many. So with that as a final statement in our first half of our class, our final class on dissolution of the mind stream in the Kundalini Yoga system, let's take our break, and for the live streaming audience, we'll come back in about 15 minutes for about an hour more of teachings in this final class. Thank you for your kind attentions. Namaste. Welcome back to the second half of our final class on Dissolution of the Mindstream series, some 7, 8, or 9 week long with a few breaks in between, course on this interesting phrase, dissolution of the mind stream, as if the mind were some sort of stream of particles or a stream of consciousness, they say. And those would be intelligent particles. In the same way you would look into an object and find particles of matter, you could look into your thoughts, you could look into food, you could look into energy, and they would all be streaming particles on different levels of vibration. You'd have to have a subtler mental vibration to perceive how intelligence flows. Somebody was using the analogy just this afternoon before we started class of, a few hundred years ago there were no cars. So the rubber was in the forest, and the gasoline was in the pre-refinement stage, and the metal was in the earth, and everything that was a part of a car was in the earth, you see. So, and then later, how did the car come together? How did we extract those things and put them together in such a thing as an automobile? It was through intelligence. So the point that was being made was that science is really not accounting for intelligence as a living being, as consciousness, as awareness, or as the Upanishads say, that is anterior to life and mind. Consciousness is anterior to life and mind. That's right out of the Mundaka Upanishad. Anterior means before. So before life and mind ever came into existence, there was this intelligence. Buddha was named after it, for instance. So he used to call divine reality Pragyaparam, the supreme intelligence. What we would call Atman, or divine reality, or Brahman, Buddha nature. So accounting for intelligence, then, we should also account for its streams. And if you're talking about the chakra system that we were looking at recently, then consciousness is streaming in and out of those vortexes. If it's at the third chakra, then it's basically heaven with ancestors, or the third chakra is digestion of food and production of the fetus, and everything that happened there at that level of human awareness. So you have to account for souls entering into that level of consciousness and departing out of that level of consciousness, and maybe getting trapped in cycles at that level of consciousness, heaven to earth to hell kind of idea. But beyond heaven, earth, and hell is this fourth chakra, and beyond that is the fifth, sixth, and seventh. They designate inner worlds, the kingdoms of heaven within, by which a soul marches in inward ascension fashion towards its true nature, towards realization of its true nature. And it gives up as it does not only the bodies that it assumes, but the impositions that plague the body it assumes, like, say, birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death are problems that plague the embodied consciousness. So it basically transcends those two on this march of inward ascension. Then that's all happening by the stream of particles of your own intelligence, right up to these two petals we were talking about, inward stream and outward stream, the two petals of the Agya chakra, Om. So looking at it in terms like that opens us up to all of these potentials and possibilities within us, and starts a person on the spiritual path per se, a path that they'll start walking and will, according to Krishna, pick up a thread of their yoga in each lifetime until they finally perfect themselves. And as we were saying just before we ended the break, they think about it in terms of 3 lifetime scenarios in Buddhism. It sounds sort of what Sri Sharda was saying here in one of these quotes, that practice japa and meditation for 1 lifetime, come back another lifetime, pick up the thread of your practice, intensify it, go to another lifetime and do the same until finally you reach this perfection that is yours by dissolving the impediments in the mind stream. The mind is the gateway to heaven. It's also the doorway to hell, as Sri Ramakrishna said. So it's hell on the three lower centers, and it's heavenly if you reach the heart center and go deeper and deeper. So we're talking about that in terms of how souls march out of ignorance from lower truth to higher truth, and we were about here on this trajectory on the path of fulfillment. Fulfillment means started out getting a little excited about things, you had desires, you wanted to fulfill them and increase your excitement, and then you find out there was a happiness in that which was accompanied by its opposite, sorrow, sukha and dukkha. And then begin to get some joy, which elated you further. Elation is a nice word. Then you found a higher joy in hearing the truth, wisdom, truth. Then you got contented with Dharma. Dharma was your bottom line, instead of these lower excitements and so forth. Then you found peace, shanti, and then that's where we took this last quote, and the only two left over to the trajectory of highest path of fulfillment would be samatva. Both Vedanta and Buddhism talk about that as equanimity of mind. Sometimes it's called upeksha. So this idea of equanimity is foremost, and that's if thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. That kind of equanimity, it's an evenness of mind that doesn't brook any interruptions. See, it stays equal all the time, in thick and thin, as they say, or when positive and negative occurrences of life accost it, like the death of a loved one, or the birth of a child, whatever it is, along with its coloration of joy and sorrow, or happiness or unhappiness, or good and bad, all the dualities and so forth are pretty much neutralized and equalized in samatva. Even-mindedness, equal-mindedness, and then that would be a kind of penultimate fulfillment for you. In fact, if you were to go back to this class, this chart that we were looking at, right there at sthiti samadhi is called even samadhi. It's a samadhi where you're neither getting huge high flights of bliss, nor you're having any lower movements of the mind that are problematic. You're just right in the middle. It's the middle way, samadhi. You're just even in samadhi all the time, and you don't care to move out of that. There are many yogis like that, and seers and so forth, that just tend to stay in a very even state of mind all the time. You don't see them shift out. You might think, oh, what a boring life or something, or this person doesn't have any personality or any character, the way worldly people might judge that from looking on the outside. But you don't see on the inside what that soul has been through and why it's reached that state of samatva. Sri Ramakrishna's story, probably most famous story about that particular teaching, is the elephant goes into a village pond, and then there are waves all over. See, women are getting out because these big waves are moving. I've seen that happen in Indian villages where people were swimming in a small pond and an elephant got into it and just caused this riot, waves everywhere. So that's the experiences of life entering into an ordinary mind. That mind is just a village pond. But if an elephant, he says, moves into an ocean, nothing happens. So that's the mind of the seer, completely vast and open. Hundreds of elephants, herds of elephants could march in there, and there would be no real effects to the ocean. So that kind of evenness is highly valued by the illumined soul, and they really prefer to stay there. Going into blisses or coming down in any way to lower samadhis, it's overrated to them. They like that even-mindedness. That's why this is a kind of penultimate. Then there is this bliss that passes all understanding. If there's a peace that passes all understanding, then there must also be a bliss that passes all understanding. The only way, or the best way we've put that in English, is unalloyed, uninterrupted. If you're in this sthiti samadhi, this kind of equanimity, then things that come along that want to take you out of it are irritating. See, the smallest little things that are imperfect enter into your life, and you get a little irritated with it. Why is that trying to pull me out of my equanimity? You see, why do I have to put up with that? I'm a realized soul. I shouldn't have to put up with it. But the world, you're still in the body, you're still in the world, and those kinds of irritations are coming at you all the time. So you're still in a sort of practice phase of not becoming at all affected by those kinds of things, knowing they're just a part of Maya, so forth and so on, as we say, and practicing the yoga of equanimity. But at bliss, you're not doing that anymore. You've reached unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss. It's as if the mind won't even notice those little irritations, interruptions coming anymore. It just likes to stay there, like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, unaffected by anything that came. There was a story about his nephew passing away, and for a day or two, he said, I felt like my heart was being wrung like a wet towel. But then, totally gone after that. No grief, no remorse. The teachings of the Dharma in his head. You see the realization of the birthless, deathless nature of his nephew, the Atman, prevalent behind the scenes as the highest truth. What could possibly affect that, you see, once it's realized? Even once it's championed, what to speak of realized, that's going to save you from all sorts of problems of life, isn't it? You can go into the hellspital, you see. That's the hospital, the modern hellspital, and go through all sorts of horrors there, but you could still fall back on those dharmic teachings you've had, and they will pull you through. So a little bit of the subtle differences between equanimity and bliss, you might say, on this trajectory of fulfillment. Let's look at the trajectory of the soul moving along the path of discipline. I've purposefully stayed away from labeling these in Sanskrit like different yogas. Basically, this might be a kind of yoga of devotion, and this might be a kind of yoga of renunciation, but let's just call them fulfillment and discipline. There are souls who are moving along a sort of devotional trajectory, bhakti path, and they're looking in terms of fulfillment, relationship with God. But there are other souls who are looking in terms of, I don't like this world. There are plenty of them. They've realized the transitoriness of this world. And the great teachers teach from that platform. Jesus didn't come amongst you and want you to be happy with the world. Grant unto Caesar what is Caesar, but take unto yourself what is the Lord's. Birds have nests, foxes have holes, but you have no place to lay your head here. Does that sound like the teaching of fun and games in the world? Or does it sound like he was a disciplinarian? Sound like he wanted you up and out of rude ignorance and anything that might usher it in again. Any chink in your armor wherein Maya might seep back into the cracks of your thinking consciousness, see, and take you off the track. So discipline is a very powerful path. So there are some people who just want to, for whatever reason, maybe even to prove to themselves that God is real, they want to follow the path of discipline. Now, I'm not saying these two can't be blended. Great souls have done it. Some souls can hold two ideals, but this is a general trajectory of people going along a path towards fulfillment, and a trajectory of people going along the path of discipline. You might call this more traditional in a way, as far as India is concerned. So it starts out with down there with Dharma as a good start. That's a great start. Dharma is beyond morality and ethics. Morality and ethics are fine. Morality is thou shalt not kill. But Dharma is thou cannot kill. It's not possible to kill something because it was never born. So the Dharma immediately puts you in touch with the teachings of the birthless, deathless nature of yourself. You don't then, from then on, think of yourself as being a body. The bodies are born and die. Maybe. Apparently. You can't even go there with any assurance, can you? Aren't we still remembering the bodies of our fathers and mothers who have passed and our loved ones? Won't they still remember our bodies? The body actually has a very long shelf life, you see. It's there for a long time, even physical bodies. So what are you calling death? It is sort of the question. decay, see the physical form break down, but you can't decay the memory of a great soul. Jesus, 2,000 years, Buddha, 2,500 years, Krishna, 5,000 years. You can't decay the memory of a great soul. See, his body is still here. You are parts of his body, in fact. When Swami Vivekananda talked about it, in terms of the bylaws of the Ramakrishna order, he said, we will base the primary bylaws on this rule, that we are all parts of Ramakrishna's body, that he never passed. Some of us are hairs on his arm, some of us are fingers. Swamiji was probably his right arm. See? So, whatever the case may be, we're looking at this Ramakrishna phenomena, spiritual phenomena, as an eternal soul. And we are all parts of his body. We are going forward with his work. 5 million strong now in a short amount of time. So some talk here around eternal things like the Dharma. See, the quote here, whenever I contemplate the teachings of the Dharma, I cannot help but share them with others. That's a quote by the Tibetan Buddhist luminary Milarepa, who was that man I said would sing songs to you. See. So 3 young women came from the village up to the mountain, went into his cave, and asked him about life. And that was one of the things he sang to them. He says, whenever I think of the teachings of the Dharma, I cannot help but share them with others. Therefore, via compassion, I will tell you about city life. And he began to sing a song about the ills of modern people and city life. That was back in 700 AD. So cities were probably no different then than now, as far as the risks you take there with that kind of mixed consciousness that people fall into. You know, I'll mix my Maya with your Maya. You see, my ignorance with your ignorance. My knowledge assumed to be real with your knowledge assumed to be real. And truth is out of the picture, you see. We won't transcend the city, we'll just get embroiled in it. For lifetimes. See? You talk about 5 million devotees, what about a city of 5 million worldly people? So this is why we say here Milarepa would live in a cave. His name means one cloth. So that's all he had. And you know, it probably wasn't all that new. You see. He'd been wearing it for a long time. Had holes in it. He wore it so long that it wore holes in it, you see. So Milarepa, one cloth. See. That's all he needed. And a cave. And he was fine. Or put him out in the open street and he'd sing songs when he met you. You see. That's an interesting soul there that you want to meet, maybe. But try and be in a good condition when you meet him. For the song he sings to you might not be to your liking. He sings what he sees. So here he says, I cannot help but share the Dharma with others. He knows these teachings because he learned them from Marpa. Marpa was a Tibetan man who came across the Himalayas into India and learned them from Naropa. Naropa learned them from the Indian yogi, Buddhist yogi master Tilopa. And that was a line of succession that Marpa risks his life to go to India to get those teachings on yoga and Buddhism and take them over the Himalayas in 700, 600 AD. That's, you know, hard passage back then. And then taught him to his first student, Milarepa, and Milarepa became the sort of the first Tibetan champion of that particular Dharma. It's called Vajrayana path, a dual essence path, you see. So in that way, he got these teachings from Marpa, so he valued them so much that he would sing, when I think of the teachings of the Dharma, I get excited, I get happy, I get joyful. I see that they're wisdom, and I get contented, and they give me peace and equanimity. So basically, this is where fulfillment really happens in the Dharma. You go from lower truth to higher truth, lower wisdom to higher wisdom, and that Dharma is going to be a step beyond morality and ethics, as we were just saying. Now, if you have the Dharma, you must have heard it from a soul who is like Milarepa, who is in possession of it. And that's called holy company, sadhu sat sangha. And here the quote from Lord Vashishta, says, the non-dual scriptures point the way to moksha, that most elevated condition that is the very atmosphere of divine reality. So you get in the Holy Company the atmosphere of divine reality. Remember the sixth chakra? I don't even want to hear, or fifth chakra, I don't even want to hear talk about the world. I want to hear only things about divine reality. I've had enough of lower knowledge. And it's cyclic repetition. See, I was at my mechanics the other day, and people are talking about don't eat dairy for decades and so forth. And so then right on the front of the Holistic Journal, eat lots of butter. That's the name of the article, eat butter. They were wrong about it. It's actually very good for you, the oils and everything in it, you see. So this is lower knowledge, and its cycle. Changes every decade or two. The laws of Saturn's rings changed 20 years later, you see, from the first satellite you sent up there and wrote your book about them. Then the next satellite you send up later completely blows apart everything you thought about the nature of what Saturn's rings were and the laws there. That's lower knowledge. It's changing constantly. It will not satisfy you for very long. So you come to this Dharma and you want to hear about it and it only. And you're going to keep holy company then. You're going to look for people who speak of it and who live it. And you want to become one with them. Like I did with my teacher and he did with his teacher. So that changes your life. Puts you're on a completely different trajectory towards something that is now within your grasp. You can almost taste it. You know, the dog smells it. He's thinking, when can I taste it? So you've got this aroma of truth coming from holy company, and then you're pursuing it. You just want to make it your own and possess it. Priya, it is very dear. Pramoda, I want to possess it completely. You see. Once you get an inkling of it, then you want to move towards it and make it your own. When you do, then scriptural study will become a part of that. Holy Company, like my teacher, will steer you towards the scriptures. That was the reason I chose my guru over the dozens of other teachers that I came upon when I was playing music at different ashrams with a group called Jaima Music. Long before it was even popular to be doing that, Jaima Music was out with an Indian dancer, an Indian tapa player, and with these bhajans and these songs and these teachings of the Dharma, and going from ashram to Sufi Teka to Christian church to colleges to India to America to other places, and giving these teachings from this platform of divine atmosphere, then seeing all the teachers that manage these places, and then coming to see Swami Shishananda and say, what's different about him than all the others? He's a wisdom knower. He's not just professing physical exercise like hatha asanas or just breathing exercises or some sort of pseudo Kundalini yoga path. He's not just professing that we dance and sing only, and that's going to free us from all our problems. He has wisdom from the scriptures. So you go there and you say, I want that, because why? Because he's in equanimity all the time, and you're not. He has his torch lit, and you don't. So you say, how do I light my torch and keep it lit? And he will say, check out the wisdom of, in holy company of the scriptures. And particularly stay with the non-dual scriptures. That's Vishishta's, why I put Vishishta's quote there. The most elevated condition of the atmosphere of divine reality comes from knowing the non-dual scriptures. Atmagyan scriptures, not the Mithya-gyan scriptures. That is, scriptures that talk about everything but God. What you want in the scripture is who you are, what God is, and how to bring the two together. Mm-hmm. That's your only concern. So Sri Ramakrishna said, be like an ant, take the scripture up. It contains a combination of sugar and sand. The ant will take the sugar and leave the sand. So be like an ant when you go through the scriptures. Problem is, or maybe the blessing is, that when you come across the non-dual scriptures, there is no sand. It's just pretty much telling you the nature of the thing. Vedanta tells you the truth of the thing. And where you may not yet be able to realize the truth, then it backs off and gives you the discrimination path, which is this. You want to study the scriptures, contemplate, do some austerity, put forth self-effort, and get some attainment. Just like that. That's the trajectory you're on as a disciplinarian, as a sadhika. Sadhana, the spiritual practice. Sadhika, the one who practices spiritual practices, as prescribed in the scriptures given to you by the Guru. Extremely important facet of this path. Nobody should be without that if they're walking the razor's edge path called wisdom, higher wisdom. So from scriptural study, that's called svadhyaya, or Atmagyan scriptures. It talks about the self and its relationship to Brahman. The apparent two-ness of things. Well, it's obvious for you to see the difference between evil and good. That's morality, right? But when you get to this level, what you're trying to see is that distinction between God and mankind, between creature and creator, between nature and spirit. What is that distinction? See? And how do I remove it? How do I remove the line of demarcation between the ripe ego and the unripe ego, between God and his devotee? How do I get at that oneness that Christ declared when he said, I and my Father are one? And so this is what the trail you're on. This is that aroma that's wafting on the atmosphere of holy company. It's like incense, your favorite incense coming out of your favorite location. So you're going to want to contemplate that. So that's manana. So svadhyaya is scriptural study. You want to do that early on. It really happens before you meditate. A lot of people just jump into meditation, and that's a mixed bag. If you've been a fairly good meditator in a previous lifetime, fine. You can pick up the thread of that right at the level that your meditation reached in a previous lifetime. If you haven't practiced meditation in a previous lifetime and you just start meditating without all of these underpinnings, like svadhyaya, it's a no-go for the most part. You're going to want to qualify yourself. Qualification is king. And so whatever path you're practicing, say if you're practicing the Kundalini yoga system, you're not going to know about the chakras? You're going to start meditating here, and you haven't even become aware of this chakra? What to speak of the dangers of eating, drinking, and sex life at the 3 lower centers, and you're meditating? So you take a teacher to tell you about this, and then they steer you towards the Dharma, the teachings in the scriptures, and then you can contemplate. You roll it over and over in your mind, then it's going to mellow. See, like aged wine, it's going to mellow. So the contemplation then will qualify you for these next two: austerity, tapas, and sadhana itself. Actually entering into spiritual practice. You see, svadhyaya, tapas, those are two of the yamas and niyamas of yoga. They're the very first limbs. Limb 1 and limb 2 contain those elements. So that's before you even breathe or sit like this. They want you to have knowledge of the scriptures and do some austerity. Because otherwise those things can steer you off the path. You'll misinterpret the scriptures and you'll do some sort of weird, out-of-step tapas, austerity. Like, I think I'll fast for 30 days. See, and you'll do some damage, or breathe a lot, do some damage to your subtle nerve system, when you should purify them first before you fill them with prana and shakti. See? So it all has to be very figured. Mind gains enlightenment by stages kind of yoga. It gains enlightenment by stages. It's not a flash in the pan or a jump to a high position without knowing the steps in between. So in that way then, tapas, austerity, and sadhana are very important. Here's what Vivekananda says about them. The secret of religion lies not in theories, but in practice. This is all I have to preach. Doctrines have been expounded enough. There are books by the millions. Oh, for an ounce of practice. Mm-hmm. You'll find a similar perspective being aired by Sri Ramakrishna in the Gospel, where these beautiful quotes have come from. He tends to look down at book learning, but the book learning he's looking down to is the book learning of secular knowledge only without its upper attendants, or the learning of the pundits and the scholars who are learning only for making money. He used to say the pundits and scholars of my day are like vultures soaring high in the sky, but their eyes are fixed on the dead carcass on the ground. So, they're looking down on the three lower centers and trying to get wealth from their learning, trying to get fame as a scholar and so forth and so on. Name, fame, and gain. Gain, he called it. The name, fame, and gain game. Try saying that 5 times really fast in a row. Right. So it's sort of similar to what Swami Vivekananda is saying here, you see. Oh, but an ounce of practice. It means theories, there are a lot. Books, there are a lot. But oh, for an ounce of practice. So you mean to take this Dharma and this scriptural study and your teacher, what he's told you, and you mean to take it up to a level where you're qualified and your tapas will not harm you. You'll be doing higher tapas, and then your self-effort will be tried and true. For instance, what's a harmful tapas? Well, let's put it this way. What does Krishna prescribe as the best physical austerity? Fasting? No. He says in the Gita, yoga is not for one who feasts too much or who fasts too much. So he's not prescribing that kind of austerity. He says instead, worship is the best physical austerity. You need to bow down to the altar. You need to light candles. You need to wave incense. You need to repeat the mantra and set up a holy atmosphere and sit there. Once you invite God into your house, then sit with God. See? So that's going to follow this line of this trajectory of self-discipline, so leading towards the highest goal. Now the highest goals would be attainment, sampadyate, attainment, and eventually you'll get to that non-dual position called para, or transcendence. Over here, the quote by Sri Shardadevi says, at the time of creation, people had wisdom from their very birth. Consequently, they at once realized the unreal nature of the world. They renounced it and practiced austerity. They were liberated in no time. So this appearance of name and form and time and space based on the karmas that have brought you here, if you recognize it quickly, then you can withdraw from it, see, and get liberated in no time. But what are people doing? Hanging out in these comfort zones, or risking the onslaught of suffering and misery and karmas and samskaras. Why are they doing that? Why aren't they getting free right away? So this is rather part of the game of an enlightened soul. Why do enlightened souls come to earth if there are any enlightened? They may want to practice how quickly they can see through Maya. I mean, there's an example in Ramakrishna and Vivekananda's life where Swamiji came, the young Narendra in his teenage years, came to Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna touched him, put him in a high state where the whole world went away. And Swamiji came out and said, what have you done to me? I have my parents at home. I have my life. What are you doing? And Ramakrishna said, oh, it's fine. Come again. See? Mm-hmm. So Swamiji went away and he said, what did that man do to me? Next time I go visit him, he's not going to do that to me again. Well, he did. He went back and saw him. Ramakrishna touched him. He went into a high state again. The whole world went away. See? So this is really a kind of metaphoric play of the master with his chief disciple that happens to the soul, you see, as it makes these onslaughts. You want to make a quick onslaught, as I said, to divine reality out of this lower ignorance and get rid of it in a thrice, quickly, because it has this tendency to grab onto you and pull you down. So, back to my main point, the illumined soul, at a certain level of its realization, will come here and see how quickly it can see through Maya. Maya is no easy thing to see through, you might have noticed. So it will practice that. It will come, like in Swamiji's case, within 20, 21 years, Maya is gone. You see. He was already on the trail in knowledge of himself, had great wisdom, had good qualities. Only needed Ramakrishna to introduce him a little bit to that non-dual teachings in the Ashtavakra Samhita to break through that final veil, see, and to accept Divine Mother Shakti. There are certain things in there that Vivekananda was introduced to afresh, you might say, by Ramakrishna. But Ramakrishna called him a Nitya Siddha. He's an eternally perfect soul. He didn't need that kind of teaching. So then why was he there? To show us how to penetrate quickly through Maya and get free. And she puts it nicely in that saying. She saw all this happen to Vivekananda. And she saw Ramakrishna doing that to his disciples, giving them this higher wisdom, this dharma, and this whole path, opening them up to sadhana. Most of Ramakrishna's disciples were following this kind of path. His monastic disciples will follow this kind of path generally, and the householders will follow this kind of path generally. So that's all a good example of how souls come here to act out this scenario of spiritual awakening for us, so that we may do it. They even take teachers when they didn't need teachers. So I would disagree with the person who says, don't take any teachers, you don't need it, you're already Atman. I would say, let's look at the great souls who take teachers to show us that we need to take teachers so that we can understand the depth and profundity of our path. And use that dharma, that vidya, that wisdom, to destroy avidya and get free quickly, as she says. They were liberated in no time. Once you've done that in one lifetime, you can do it in another lifetime. This is how the Bodhisattva proceeds to have 13 or 14 conscious lifetimes. Or the Jivan Mukta in our tradition in Vedanta is free every time that it comes back to earth. So I think we have taken this right on up to the top. There is one quote at the bottom by Lord Vashishta. Let's take that to wrap up this particular visual on Kundalini Yoga and dissolving the mind stream. Vashishta says, "From peace, a fuller, richer, nobler knowledge will dawn, to be tempered further still by the apt instructions proceeding from an illumined preceptor in conjunction with the revealed scriptures. Then, through sententious striving, you shall come upon, in a state of spiritual exaltation, the truth which you are seeking, and which puts to death even the most delicate and diaphanous tendrils of ignorance." So you can see that there's at least 4 or 5 of these elements in Yoga Vashishta's description of the seeker coming unto his own, spiritually speaking. Put to death even the most diaphanous tendrils of ignorance. That is, even the most subtlest, you see, that you can't see, will get dispersed. So complete clarity will dawn. Complete equanimity will dawn. And you can get into that samadhi of transcendence. So it's good to go through this chart, maybe for the second time we've ever taken it in SRV classes, called The Disappearance of Ignorance. And in the time remaining, let's look at another Kundalini chart that points to or emphasizes the dissolution of the mind stream. Because the element that we were coming out of last week, the last 2 classes, was dissolving the ignorance in the mind so that the mind stream can flow. So here you see, I didn't turn it to that. Here I see that the 7 chakras are again noted, and this time as lotuses with different petals. can see Shiva and Shakti on one side, and the great snake winding down here in the etheric waters at the base of our consciousness. That is Kundalini Shakti, as they sing about her, for instance, in these beautiful songs. Manavarana Shashana Ankushehe Naratrana Tarihara Chakshushehe Gunagana Prayana Deva Gane Guru Deva Daya Karadina Jane Kula Kundalini Guma Banjakahe Redi Granti Vidarana Karakahe Mama Manasa Chanchala Ratra Dine Gurudeva Daya Karadina Jane. Kula Kundalini Guma Banjakahe. That is, the spiritual force at the base of the spine awakens at your touch. And desire disappears when you grant detachment and discrimination. However, despite all the boons that you bestow upon me, he's talking to the Guru, my mind still remains restless. Bestow thy grace upon me. It's called Guru Stavastake. It's one of the stotrams to the spiritual teacher. Very beautiful. The previous verse was speaking in terms of, it is by austerities offered to you that the mind comes under control. Tapas, if you're just doing it for yourself and you have no foundation, nothing, no one to offer it to, no divine mother to offer it to, no sense of divine presence or the Lord as embodied within the heart and as manifesting at the Atman, then it's tapas that doesn't have any effect really. You embody yourself on earth to show us the way. Even the gods and goddesses praise you with divine hymns. O teacher divine, kindly shower thy compassion on your loving devotee. So those are the kind of truth sentiments that exist in these beautiful songs of India. That was written by one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa when after he appeared in the body. So this is some of the beauty of Kundalini Yoga contained in the songs and stotrams of India. Now the reason I'm putting this particular chart up, because it is somewhat complex, but concentrate on the center there for a minute. You can see up the side of both of these sets of chakras, this line of chakras, these two sets of poisons and nectars. It's an interesting teaching that poisons are still present in some form or another, even at a very high level. Like if the consciousness were to arise here, the poison there, can you imagine what it might be? Disorientation. It is such a high place, and there's no compass, you see. There's no land, there's no form. So the soul could all of a sudden feel disoriented and get lost. And that's been a rather common, you might say, complaint or observation of certain souls, that's rather disorienting. So that would be a potential poison at a very high level. So you can see until non-duality dawns on the soul, this march, this razor's-like edged path, you see, up the chakras has to be well guarded, you see, well observed, well trodden. So you have to proceed according to the tradition. You don't want to wander off the path. So that's just an example of here at the Agya Chakra. Let's look at some of the nectars and poisons then before we end our final class on this subject. Remember, this is all in terms of dissolving these mind stream. So when you're dissolving it, are you dissolving only the negativities, or you're also going to be dissolving the positivities? Yes, both. Non-duality is beyond dualities. That's why it's called non-duality. See? So you're going to want to get beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, of course, but you will probably also want to get, in order to get transcendence, you're probably going to get beyond form and formlessness and thoughts about bondage and liberation. You're going to get beyond those. In other words, nothing exists but Brahman. Bondage and liberation is a part of the game, isn't it? I was never bound, but you won't know that till you get free. You won't know it in the process of getting free. Everything seems like it's real, including this ignorance. That's why you bring another unreal thing into it, austerity. It's a higher Maya, you see. This is the lower Maya, and you're bringing a higher Maya into it. In other words, you're saying, I'm going to destroy the lower Maya with the higher Maya. I'm going to practice austerity even though the soul's already perfect. Yet I'm practicing austerity to perfect it. It's sort of a dichotomous hippopotamus situation. All right, in the remaining time, which is about 10 minutes or so, let's march up and show you quickly this list of poisons and nectars. At the very lowest chakra, that's at the base of the spine, called the Muladhara, where she remains coiled up, this serpent of Kundalini Shakti, like a spring that's going to uncoil. Have you uncoiled your spring yet? The teaching of Kundalini teacher will ask you if you go there. Have you unfurled your sail? Have you uncoiled your spring? And you'll go, what's he talking about? See, he means have as the snake straightened up in you? Is she beginning to ascend, and the coils are beginning to unwind? You see. So there at the base, the Muladhara, you see the poisons are lust, jealousy, greed, and obsession. There's a kind of teaching in Buddhism called Shine meditation, where you become a burning pillar. This spinal column, as it were, is full of fire. And it's got the fire of purification in it down low, and it's got the fire of austerity in it in the middle, and it's got the fire of realization, knowledge in it up high. So you become a burning pillar, and so you concentrate on this lower center, and you see that it's accompanied by jealousy and these kinds of negativities that Kundalini Yoga is mentioning here. So you take the wind of earth and you blow it against the passion of jealousy, and you purify the passion of jealousy, and then you take the power of jealousy and bring it up the spine. And you do that with each center. At the next center is lust, sexual, and so you take the wind of water, you flow it against the poison of lust, and you purify lust, but you take the power of lust up with you, up the spine. You see? This is how you become a burning pillar. Beautiful meditation called Shine meditation. So in this way, it's a kind of an inward visualization meditation that deals with the passions and takes the elements in you of earth, water, fire, air, and ether in a transcendent form, and helps you ascend, inward ascension as we were calling it. Well, you might have lust, jealousy, greed, and obsession there at the root of the spine, but you also have sexuality, sensuality, security, and stability. Those are all pluses in the sense of having to use an opposite against itself, a fire against itself. You fight fire with fire kind of idea. So these are all things that you take account for, you meditate on, sort of like in yoga you would meditate on earth, air, fire, water, and ether, and tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling. You'd use those for foundations for meditation. In the same way here, you're using these nectars to meditate on. What is my sexuality? What is my sensuality? What is my security? And you'll find out that the root chakra has plenty to offer there to get you started. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be dwelling there. See? So it's a very powerful, almost idiosyncratic chakra. It's like everything begins with that. So you can't call it negative, and you can't certainly call it all positive. But you can look at it in terms of poisons and nectars and discern how to use it, how to navigate yourself, how to make an offering to Kula Kundalini at the base of the spine and attract her to unfurl, to move up the spine, move up the subtle spiritual spine to these other lotuses. The next chakra has in it, that is at the sexual organs, pleasure, violence, addiction, and selfishness as its poisons. Its nectars are reproduction, joy, creativity, and enthusiasm. Across the board, you can see that the poisons will be counteracted by the nectars, and you'll just need to, as in the fivefold panchakarna process of dissolving the mind stream, you need to account for the poisons and the nectars. You need to know where these problems are coming from, where they're seated. Remember, it sounds like we're talking about the physical body when we talk about the spine, but we're not. We're talking about the mental body. The root chakra is not in the physical body, it's in the base of the mind. So you have to understand that. You're in a mental yoga here, you're not practicing a physical yoga, and there are plenty of people who misunderstand that. And all of a sudden they're having bliss in the body, and they're doing asanas, and everything is body. The Westerner is really guilty of that kind of problem. So if you're taught to it, that all of this is in the mind, all the chakras are inside of you, they're the kingdoms of heaven within you, then you have an inner life, and you have a good way of beginning. You're not looking for some strange thing to happen in your physical spine. You see, oh, all of a sudden I've got pain there. You know, just go see your doctor. You probably twisted yourself out of shape while you're doing some physical asana. You need to go get an alignment from a chiropractor. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. These are in the mind. These are lotuses inside of you. They have to be taught that way, and if they aren't taught that way, and you've been taught otherwise, you should be corrected in your thinking, because this is all about inner life. The next chakra is Manipura, associated with the chakra at the solar plexus there. Its poisons are fear, anxiety, judgment, and emotionalism. Well, let's see if I can just open up my tummy there and find fear and anxiety. They're not there. Your bowels are there. Come on, get a clue. See, what you're feeling is in the mind. It's this solar plexus center is in the mind. And that's where your fear is, and that's where your anxiety is, and that's where your judgments are. Where else? So make that shift, because if you're trying to do some sort of water purification on the belly, or some sort of strange modern psychotherapy or something, and you're doing it for the body only, then you're not getting to the seat of your problems at all. You've got to be doing it up here, because when this is right, the body will be right. Why is that? Because the body comes from the mind. That's its source. Talk about cause and effect. The mind produces bodies as many as it wants, and has been. And that's been part of the problem for you, is that you haven't realized that the body is an expression of the mind. And that's the whole rebirth, reincarnation teaching that you get in the dharmic level right at the very beginning. And if you haven't gotten it, then you go on thinking that you're the body in some form or another. Even your spirituality is all associated with the body. Body and lungs, asana and breathing, with no inner ground with which to actuate it as a practice. You need a mental practice, you see, intellectual practice. That's what study of scriptures are. Did you see anything in here about anything about the body? Or did you see it all about the mind? Did you hear of anything here about the body? Or was it all about the mind? These are mind-only schools. So if you want to understand India properly, and Mother Wisdom properly, and the avatars and incarnations properly, then, and Buddhism properly, then it's mind school you're talking about. The mind is responsible for all of this, not God, not devil, not nature. Those are all accompaniments, but the mind is at the root of it all. It's the culprit, that is, hell is there, or it's the champion, heaven is there. It's the animal, or it's the hero. And therefore, we also have to make a cautionary statement about the difference between the mind and the brain. Brain is part of the body. We're talking about mind, fear, anxiety, judgment, pleasure, violence, addiction, selfishness. What does the body know about those things? Maybe a few instincts, but those instincts were based on past lifetimes, where it learned those instincts. So what you need to do is figure out that all of those things are happening in your mind and translating into the body. And that's what you have to make the connection with, so that you can purify the mind. Because when the mind's pure, life is pure. You must have noticed, you walk out of the house in a good state of mind, it's a good day. Not? Then it's a bad day. The mind dictates everything, and not just on this earth either, brain, but it dictates your line of incarnations. Ask any great soul that has come to earth. If thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. Is the eye, single eye in the body somewhere? Is it on my forehead? Inner life is what you need. And this means when you get rid of something like fear, you're going to get rid of the fear of formlessness. Fear of formlessness is part of the curtain of nescience. If we had another hour, we could look into the curtain of nescience with its problems of fear, doubt, and ignorance, and the brooding on them that increases them, so that people can't see through them. Talking about seeing through Maya in a short time, if the curtain of ignorance is thick in you, curtain of nescience, then you won't see through Maya. You'll take Maya to be real. Even if you're a very intellectual person, you'll take Maya to be real. You won't even know there's such a thing as Maya. It will be hidden to you. You won't know that its influence is all around you. So, a strong statement here for making sure you understand Kundalini Yoga properly is these chakras are within, kingdoms of heaven within you. My Father's mansion has many chambers. You need to look inside for these and find your poisons and use your nectars. Then you can say, I'm on the spiritual path. That heart chakra has the poison of passion, rejection, weakness, and imbalance. It has the nectars of love, devotion, compassion, and circulation. That is, there's a kind of prana that circulates your nutrients to your bloodstream, to your organs. Well, take that out of the physical and put it into the vital and the mental, and you'll find out that this wisdom circulates in a kind of bloodstream called prana. And it feeds some of your organs there. You see. And it feeds them with compassion, love, and other healthy components. So you have a stream of particles, don't you, that are at a higher, deeper level. You need to become aware of those and direct those towards a certain area, if you know what I mean. Direct them. Kundalini is wanting to rise in you. Don't impede her. Let her rise. Go with her. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, you will hear him say that as I transcended and went upwards to chakras, that's in this great mind, the chakras inside, each one was a lotus, and each lotus was drooping. And when she showed me to this lotus, I worshipped it, and it blossomed. Then I went to the next chakra, worshipped that, it blossomed. I went to the next chakra, worshipped that, it blossomed. And when it blossomed, I saw all the gods and goddesses within. All the deities were in that lotus, and all the powers, and they all wanted me to stay there. That's an illumined soul awakening to everything that's within it. Who wouldn't want the liberator to stay with them? See? Have you ever been able to convince a liberator to stay in the body? Or has it always been telling you, transcend, transcend? You see? Go beyond, go beyond. Gatam, gatam, paragatam. Have no hope for me, for the world, forevermore. I am gone and gone forever. Now, follow me. They don't come here to stay and show you, let's have some fun here in the body, see? They come, they give you the teachings, and they want you up and out of suffering, without any doubts. So this is some teaching around circulation at a very high level. We can talk about it as a prana that's circulating nutrients in your bloodstream, but don't forget you have a bloodstream called prana that's circulating through nerves called nadis. This is all Kundalini teaching. And you want to make that circulation carry nutrients. That's dharma, wisdom. So that it carries them to the organs of the inner body, like love, devotion, and so forth. Those would be like parts of your spiritual body, parts of your mind. Now, the next, we have 1 or 2 minutes left. Let's look at the final 2 chakras. In the throat chakra, falsehood, projection, deceit, and domination rest, according to Kundalini Yoga teaching, in that throat chakra. That means you can deceive people by what you know. You can become a false prophet, as they say, or a charlatan, a spurious guru. So that's a poison that's very possible there and has happened to beings who are making this inward ascension. So deceit, domination, falsehood, that's all a poison potential at the throat chakra. They then advise communication with your teachers and with other seekers, with the scriptures. That's the kind of communication you want. You don't want to close the book on realization. When they called Sri Ramakrishna Master, he said, don't say that. Father, Guru, Master, I don't like those 3 words because they prick my flesh, he said. They're like saying that I've stopped growing. But Mother's wisdom is infinite. And I am infinite too. From the infinite, from the finite, the infinite has come. Yet being infinite, only infinite remains, right? So communication leaves the doors open, you see, for, at a very high level, for hearing the realizations from the scriptures, from other beings, you see, study of scriptures, and from contemporary sages and saints like Vivekananda, who are actually in our time teaching these things. So use those, communication, balance, mentation, and freedom, as nectars. The final chakra then, that is, we're not even counting this as a chakra. Quite often they call it a 6-chakra system, because this is so far beyond that you can't even call it a center. It's just split open, wide open, boundless freedom. You see. So no poisons and nectars there. It's non-dual. So at that third eye chakra we arrive, and as I said, we see there's a problem of indeterminacy, misdirection. That's a kind of loss of balance, mistrust and confusion. So kind of a disorientation that can happen there if you haven't, as I said, prepared the ground for inward ascension. Go slowly from step to step, don't jump. And use her as the guide. She knows what she's doing. She knows these chakras. These are her lokas, her inner worlds. As she ascends towards Shiva, she's unerring. So stick with her. And you won't make errors. See? Follow that trajectory she's tracing for you. Now the nectars there would be intuition, which would helpfully get you over this doubt, this misdirection. Visualization, clarity, and spirituality itself. This is where we put spirituality, not on the level of spooks and ghosts and occult powers and medicines and herbs and elixirs and drugs and some sort of strange pseudo-religious stuff. Spirituality is beyond religion. And you get spirituality by practice, by sadhana. the attainment. You get some padyate via sadhana. So spirituality exists at a very high level, but what I can say about its penultimate state is clarity. We've already talked about that in the first half. Khyati, or sampada, as we said here, said this samatva, equanimity, those kinds of words, upekshanam, equanimity of mind, are very crucial to the attainment of both transcendence and this attainment of spirituality, authentic spirituality, very important. So there are other teachings here that we can look at another time when we have more time, but this class, a good place to end with some teachings on the poisons and nectars that are there associated with the 7 chakras, or the 6 chakras in this case, and how to dissolve the mind using the inward ascension of awakening of the Divine Mother Shakti within you, who wants nothing more than to unite with Paramashiva at the transcendent level of human awareness. Brahman is awareness. Brahman is consciousness. Free of modifications, free of limitations, free of overlays, free of colorations, free of conceptions. Free, free, free. So here the mind gets completely dissolved and therefore gets liberated. Sadhana means connection. See, that's the connections you make. But dissolution means freedom. It means fullness. You've dissolved everything that was impeding you in knowledge of your true nature, which is formless essence. So here, and thank you for your kind attentions, everyone, both here in the class and in our live streaming audience. We will end with a chant. Om Sato ma Sadgamoya Tamaso ma Joytir Gamoya Brichor ma Amritam Gamoya Abira Bira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Denamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. And lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om.